Hey, this is part 2 of this video series. If you haven't already, you should watch part 1 by clicking the link in the description, or at the top right, because that's where I go over all the rules and disclaimers for this. And hey, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing while you're there. Now, if you've already done all of that, let's move on to the main event. Being the third and final Fire Emblem game on the Game Boy Advance, Sacred Stones differentiated itself by being completely disconnected from every game that came before, story-wise. Which probably explains why, for the weapons, the developers decided to go back to good old reliable Norse mythology for inspiration. These two weapons are named after Signy and Sigmund, two characters from Norse mythology, although the spelling of their names likely comes from the opera Die Valkyrie by Richard Wagner. Signy and Sigmund were both children of the famous Norse figure Volsung, and the two of them are known for having an incestuous relationship. Given that their names are given to the signature weapons of Sacred Stone's protagonists, who are also a brother-sister duo, it definitely calls to mind certain parallels. Wow, what a great way to start off part 2, am I right? Shamshir is the generic Persian word for sword, but also refers to a specific type of curved sword originating from the 12th century Middle East. It is also sometimes used in reference to Shamshir-e Zomarodnagar, a sword from Persian mythology whose name translates to the emerald-studded sword. Regenleif is one of the Valkyries mentioned in the Norse mythic poem Grimnismal. Her name means power trace in Old Norse. This weapon is named for Adthumla, a primeval cow deity from Norse mythology. A common way of writing the name in modern English is Adhumla, meaning that this weapon's name is technically a misspelling. This name is based on Vidopnir, an immortal rooster from Norse mythology that sits in the crown of the world tree Yggdrasil. Another weapon based on mythological Norse creature. In this case, the name comes from Nidthoggr, a massive serpent that gnaws on Yggdrasil's roots. Garmr is named for Garm, a canine that guarded Norse hell, similar to the Greek monster Cerberus. The word Garmr literally means rag in Old Norse. Gleipnir was the name for the supposedly unbreakable chains that were used to bind the mighty wolf Fenrir in Norse myth. While Ivaldi himself doesn't have much importance, the Sons of Ivaldi were a group of highly skilled dwarven craftsmen from Norse mythology. They were said to have forged artifacts such as the ship Skidbladnir and Odin's spear Gungnir. Latona, also known as Leto, was the Roman goddess of motherhood and feminine demure, and is the mother of the gods Artemis and Apollo. With a name meaning nail-farer, Naglfar was a boat from Norse myth made from the finger and toenails of the dead. Its purpose was to ferry several of the gods to the battlefield for Ragnarok. With the end of the GBA trilogy, Fire Emblem moved back onto a home console and into 3D for the first time with These games are interesting when it comes to weapon names. I guess Intelligent Systems ran out of Norse names to draw from because the Tellius duology draws from practically everywhere but Norse myth. This includes a surprising amount of weapons with Middle Eastern origins, which made this section particularly hard to research for. You'll see what I mean later. This sword is named after Ragnell, a cursed maiden who was forced into a marriage with the knight Gawain, as told in the fittingly titled Arthurian play, The Wedding of Sir Gawain and Dame Ragnell. The name Alandite is actually a corruption of Arundite, which was a sword wielded by Sir Lancelot in Arthurian legend. What's interesting is that, in Japan, despite the weapon's internal file listing still being Alandite, the sword is actually named Etard. Hey, the video's not gonna get flagged if I say that, right? Etard was a maiden from Arthurian mythology who was pursued romantically by the knight Peleus. For you Western fans, you may recall that Etard was the name of a blade usable by Ike in Radiant Dawn. Fittingly enough, that sword is called Alandite in the Japanese version of the game. This is another Kati weapon, like the Mani Kati and Soul Kati from Blazing Blade. Watch part 1 if you want an explanation for those. The word vague in the name likely comes from the French word meaning wave, rather than the English word. In the Japanese version of Radiant Dawn, this weapon is listed as Wato in the game files, which is the Japanese name for the Wo Dao weapon. In all versions besides the English one, this weapon is called Sehnsucht, which is the German word for longing. Irvin is a word meaning soul in Avestan, an ancient language from East Iran. The word is most commonly used to describe the concept of the soul in Zoroastrianism. Balberith comes from Baal-berith, a Canaanite god that was later repurposed as a demon in Abrahamic mythology. Matrona is a form of the Latin word mater, which means mother. Matrona was also sometimes used as a title for the Roman goddess Juno. The name Amity doesn't have a clear origin, but it possibly comes from the French word amité, meaning friendship. Gurgurant is a lesser-known character from Arthurian legend. He was a cannibalistic king whose son was murdered by a giant and later avenged by Sir Gawain. An onager was a type of siege weapon first used in ancient Rome. As opposed to a trebuchet, which used a heavy counterweight in order to launch a projectile, the onager instead utilized tension force, often through a twisted rope, resulting in a usually much more compact design. Stiletto is another name for a small, slender dagger, usually in reference to a switchblade, and yes, this is also where the shoes get their name from. This weapon is named after the Taksh Kaman, a type of small bow used by soldiers of the Mughal Empire, from the 16th to 19th centuries in northern India. This is the one that I had a really hard time finding the origin of. From what I found, it could be from Akkar, a fortress besieged by the ancient Caliph Al-Mansur bin Nasr Allah while in pursuit of the rebel Abu Yazid Makhlad ibn Qaidad al-Nukhari. Alternatively, it could also be from the Arabic word ikar, which means drugs. So take your pick. If someone actually knows what this is from, please let me know in the comments. I'm really curious. The arbalest was a type of large crossbow from 12th century Europe. It had a noticeably higher tensile strength compared with other crossbows, making it much more powerful but much harder to draw. The card was a single-edged Persian knife, specifically designed to penetrate chainmail. Peshkats is a corruption of peshkabs, a type of curved medieval Persian dagger. A basilard was a sort of hefty Swiss short sword used in the Middle Ages. There are a couple different possibilities for this one. If we go by the Middle Eastern theme that several of the past weapons have had, Thani could come from the House of Al-Thani, a historic noble family from Qatar. The Japanese pronunciation of the name is Seini, which could be based on the Japanese phenome Se, which can mean holy, celestial, or star, depending on the kanji used. Cymbeline comes from Cunobeline, a king of pre-Roman Britannia. The weapon uses an alternative spelling of his name, popularized by the Shakespeare play Cymbeline. Carreau means bolt in French, specifically in reference to the ammo used by a crossbow or catapult. However, given that the weapon is a dark tome rather than a bow, the name is more likely based on Carreau, a demon mentioned in the Histoire admirable de la possession et conversion d'un pénitent, or Admirable History of the Possession and Conversion of a Penitent. Admirable History was a report written by the French Catholic Inquisitor Sebastian Michaelis following his investigation of a series of cases of demonic possession at the Ursuline Convent at Aix-en-Provence. Verine comes from Varin, another demon mentioned in Admirable History. It's also an Old French word meaning window. Cradelad was the daughter of the hero Ludla Errant in the Arthurian story Colvach ac Olwen. Caladbolg was the sword wielded by the hero Fergus mac Rois in Irish mythology. Tarvos comes from Tarvos Trigoranus, a bull deity from Celtic mythology. Lunasad is the name of a traditional Gaelic harvest festival, and is still celebrated in modern Ireland every year on August 1st. Floret is the Spanish word for foil, a thin sword used for fencing. Following the mediocre sales of the two Tellius games, Fire Emblem went into a sort of hibernation for a few years. It seemed that all hope was lost until 2012, with the release of Awakening is known by fans as the game that saved the Fire Emblem series from cancellation, but in terms of weapon names, it's a bit disappointing. While it carries a few notable weapons over from previous games, in terms of the new ones, Awakening finds itself lacking. That's not to say that there's nothing here to talk about, just a much smaller selection. Amatsu is an old Japanese word meaning heavenly or imperial. It comes from Amatsu Mikaboshi, an ancient Japanese god of the stars. Goetia is a Latin term referring to the occult practice of summoning demons or angels. It is also used to refer to the Ars Goetia, a section of the Lesser Key of Solomon that describes how to summon 72 different demons. I'm grouping these two because they're both cases of the weapons just being words in other languages. Specifically, Wolfberg is German for Wolf Mountain, and Volant Axe is French for Flying Axe. Awakening continues the trend of uninspired weapon names with Sol and Luna, a sword and lance that are named after the respective skills that they grant when wielded. Those skills are in turn named after the Latin words for sun and moon. Astra, however, is a little bit different. The weapon is once again named after a skill, which gets its name from the Latin word for stars. What makes Astra interesting, though, is that the name also has mythological significance. In Hindu mythology, Astra refers to divine projectile weapons of immeasurable power, wielded by the gods themselves. However, it eventually came to be used as a sort of catch-all term for any weapon that was used by releasing it from one's hand, such as an arrow. Given that the Astra weapon in Awakening is a bow, I choose to believe that this naming was intentional, although it being a coincidence is far more likely. And that's actually it for Awakening. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I called it lacking earlier. However, that would be more than made up for with the next game. I guess pair of games would actually be the more appropriate classification here. Fire Emblem Fates was notable for being split into 2, technically 3, games. While there is overlap in the available weapons between games, each one does have a few unique items. Furthermore, while the Conquest version is based on medieval Europe like past games, the Birthright version instead has some more traditional Japanese influence in its setting, and this extends to its weapon catalog. Multiple standard weapon types have been renamed to Japanese equivalents, so I'll be going over those first. The Naginata was a type of polearm used by samurai, and was essentially just a spear with a larger curved blade. It is considered to be one class of the Nihonto, which are Japanese bladed weapons. Literally meaning throwing spear, the Nagayari was another samurai polearm, this time with a straight blade. As the name implies, it was also often used as a throwing weapon. Yumi is the name for a traditional Japanese bow. This weapon is called makibishi in the Japanese version, after a type of tool commonly used by the ninja. Made of either iron or hardened water chestnut pods, makibishi were small spiked objects designed to puncture through the waraji sandals commonly worn in feudal Japan. Kodachi were small Japanese swords with lengths of no less than 60 centimeters. Their exact purpose is unknown, but it's theorized that they may have been used as companion swords to normal-sized tachi, or as training swords for adolescents. The wakizashi was a Japanese short sword often used by samurai as a companion sword to their main katana. Shinai means bamboo blade, and refers to a type of sword with a non-metal blade used for practicing kendo. The kukri was a machete-like weapon with a curved blade originating from Nepal. While it could be used for combat, it was mostly used as a utility knife. And now onto the non-generic weapons. Yato is Japanese for knight sword, and is actually a shortened version of the weapon's Japanese name, Yato no Kami. Yato no Kami means gods of the night sword, and refers to a pair of snake gods from Japanese myth. Siegfried is the German name of the famous Norse hero Sigurd, as seen in the old German epic poem Nibelungenlied. Brynhildr was a Valkyrie and shield maiden from German and Norse mythology, sometimes referred to as Brunhild. She is best known for marrying Gunther, a friend of the hero Sigurd. Raijinto is one possible reading of this sword's Japanese name, and literally translates to Thunder God Katana. Fujin was a Japanese wind god and a compatriot of the thunder god Raijin, for whom Raijinto is named. Hagakure roughly translates to in the shadow of leaves in Japanese. This is possibly in reference to Hagakure, a book on the samurai lifestyle based on commentaries from the 17th to 18th century samurai Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Argelmir is another name for Ymir, the ancestor of all Jotun, or mythical creatures in Norse mythology. The chakram was a throwing weapon originating from India, consisting of a circular blade with a sharpened outer edge. You might also recognize it if you play Mii Sword Fighter in Super Smash Bros. The Japanese name of this weapon is zanshin, a concept from Japanese martial arts that refers to an altered, heightened state of mind. In archery, it refers to the posture taken after shooting an arrow. The Bifrost was a rainbow bridge from Norse mythology connecting Midgard, the human world, to Asgard, the world of the gods. The Spatha was a type of longsword used in the Roman Empire, mostly by heavy infantrymen and gladiators. Also called a tuck in English, the estoc was a two-handed French longsword used from the 14th to 17th centuries. The sword had a pointed tip but no bladed edges, and was designed to combat enemies wearing mail and plate armor. Also just called a kris, the kris knife was a type of dagger indigenous to Southeast Asia, famous for its signature wavy blade. In addition to its use in combat, the kris can also have symbolic value as a talisman, heirloom, or decoration. Also known as the Yawning Void, Ginnungagap was the primordial void from Norse mythology and cosmogony, as mentioned in the Old Norse text Gylfaginning. Both Gunglari and Bulwark are alternate names for the Norse god Odin. Skadi was a Jotun goddess from Norse mythology associated with bow hunting, skiing, winter, and mountains. It's also a common Norse noun translating to harm or scathe. After the release of Fates, Fire Emblem was more popular than ever. The series began to branch off into spin-offs and remakes at this point, leaving fans waiting several years until the next main series entry. Three Houses takes a similar approach to the Tellius games in that its weapons draw from a wide variety of cultures and mythologies, although this time most of them stick to being of European origin. Ymir comes from Eimr, a weapon used by the ancient pagan god Baal. Eredbar is from Eredbear, a spear wielded by the Irish god Lugh. It is sometimes known as Slaughterer, hence the weapon's similarly named combat art, Atrocity. A slightly less stupid spelling of Failnaught, a bow wielded by King Arthur's knight Tristan. As the name suggests, the bow was said to never miss its mark. The Aegis was a legendary shield from Greek mythology. Although it takes slightly different forms over multiple different stories, it was most commonly used by the goddess Athena. Raphael is the Greek form of the name Raphael, one of the archangels in several Abrahamic religions. Luin comes from Luin of Keltkar, a spear of intense bloodlust wielded by Keltkar mac Ulthakar, a character from Irish myth. Thyrsus was a staff covered in ivy vines, used by Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and festivity. Freikugel is a portmanteau of the German words frei, meaning free, and Kugel, meaning ball or bullet. The name itself is based on the Freikugeln, a set of magic bullets forged through a deal with the devil in the German opera Der Freischütz. The Japanese name of the weapon, Raite, more accurately translates as Thunderbolt or Thunderclap. Like Freikugel, Blutgang is a portmanteau of two German words, in this case Blut, meaning blood, and Gang, meaning path or movement. The name Blutgang comes from the name of a sword used by the legendary Germanic hero Hama. Vajra Mushti is an Indian martial art whose name roughly means thunder fist or diamond fist. It can also refer to a type of knuckle duster used in said martial art. Dromi was the second set of chains used to bind the great wolf Fenrir in Norse mythology, although they were also ultimately broken out of. Also known as Gay Assail, the Spear of Assal was one of the names for the spear used by the Irish god Lu. Biochain was a shield used in the Irish mythological story Stella Conchrabar. The Japanese name of the weapon, Tsukizaru Mono, literally means that which cannot run out. The caduceus was a staff carried by the Greek messenger god Hermes. In the modern day, it's often used as a symbol of medicine on the logos of hospitals and such. Now, you might be wondering why a symbol of Hermes is associated with medicine. In reality, it isn't. The caduceus's ties to medicine are likely due to it being confused for the rod of Asclepius. Asclepius was a son of the Greek god Apollo, and was himself a god of medicine. While the caduceus has two snakes twisting around it, the rod of Asclepius only has one. This mix-up is theorized to have been started when the US Army Medical Corps adopted the caduceus as part of their insignia in 1902. Adding to the confusion is that there is another staff in three houses called Asclepius for the reasons stated previously. A tathlum was a sort of sling stone used by ancient Irish warriors. One notable mythological instance is how the god Lu used a tathlum to slay the giant Balor. Ukonvasara was the hammer used by the Finnish god Ukko. In fact, the name literally just translates to Ukko's hammer in Finnish. Indra is the Hindu god of the heavens, thunder, and storms, who is said to be able to fire arrows of lightning with his bow. The athame is a type of ceremonial dagger used in magical neo-pagan and satanic rituals. Circe was a minor goddess and enchantress from Greek mythology, most notable for her appearance in Homer's Odyssey. Sariel is an angel from Judaic tradition. According to the Book of Enoch, Sariel is responsible for teaching man about the lunar calendar. This spell is obviously named after Hades, the famed Greek god of the underworld. Abraxas was a mystical Greek word, and is speculated to be the origin of the word abracadabra. And that's it. Every single notable weapon from every Fire Emblem game. It's finally done, I can rest. I mean, it's not like there are a few games left whose weapon rosters dwarf all the other games, right? Right? See you in part 3.